Welcome back to Java programming. In this video, I want to do a demonstration of constructors with the vehicle demo that we've been working with so far this semester. So if you don't have the latest code, you could grab that out of GitHub. Otherwise, if you want to bring the code in from Unit 4, I'm using the classes pretty much exactly as they were. The only change is that I've updated each of the classes with a package statement so that I can use my compile and run scripts for packaging up the code, which we're doing in this module. So if we take a look at the vehicle factory, if you remember, we've got vehicle as an abstract class, and then we have car and airplane as our concrete classes. And here you can see that I'm instantiating two car objects and then setting some different values on those. And so what I want to do in this video is, rather than calling the setters, I want to get this set up so that I can instantiate a car and pass in all of the values right up front. One thing that you may or may not remember is that on car, I have getters and setters for the number of cylinders. And you'll notice in the factory here that I'm not dealing with the cylinders. So I want to be able to pass in the cylinders, number of cylinders, as well as make, model, the year, and the color. So let's go ahead and add a constructor on car. And I'm going to start off with a no argument constructor. So typically, once we start adding constructors, we want to make sure that we've got a no argument constructor and then any overloaded constructors. Whether or not we're going to use that empty car constructor doesn't really matter. We still want to be sure that we're providing a way that a car object can be created, unless we've got a really good reason not to do that. So let's go ahead and start off with our comment here. And this is going to be pretty basic. It just creates a car. And this no argument constructor isn't going to take in any parameters, so I don't need anything special there. And then let's write the constructor. So we need the public keyword, and then simply the name of the class that I'm creating, and then curly braces. And for right now, I'm not going to do anything special here, but I think it's helpful to add in a system.out.println so we can just keep track of when this gets called. So in the car constructor. And let's just stop right there and compile and then run our code as it is so that we can see when that constructor actually gets called and verify that it is indeed being called. And so let's head over here. We'll go ahead and use the compile demos. And of course, I've got an error here. I forgot my semicolon at the end of my system.out.println. So let's get that guy in there. Recompile. Things look better there, and then let's just run to see what the current state of the application is. So we've got car constructor, we've got no cylinders being set, so we're not seeing any maintenance information because we haven't set the cylinders, I believe. At least I think that's why we're not seeing values coming through there. So let's go ahead and add a new constructor here that allows us to set those number of cylinders. So get rid of our empty space here and here, and let's copy this, and then we'll tweak it to overload it for cylinders. And because now I'm going to be passing in a value, oops, spell check is not my friend there, or code completion is not my friend, we'll have a parameter called number of cylinders. So number of cylinders, the car's number of cylinders, and then here in the parentheses, that's where we add the parameter. And this is just like when we added a setter. So we have to think about what is the type of the thing that we're passing in, which is going to be an int, and I'm going to name it number of cylinders, and I'm naming it exactly the same as what the instance variable is. And some of you might think, oh, that's dangerous, but I'm going to use the this keyword in order to differentiate the two. So this is almost like what we would see, or is what we would see if we were using a code generation tool. So number of cylinders equals number of cylinders. So set the instance variable number of cylinders, this number of cylinders equal to the number of cylinders being passed in. And then I'm going to update my comment here, and I'm going to put this as the very first thing. So in the car constructor, setting the cylinder count. Okay. So we've got that set. Let's compile, make sure that works, and then we'll go ahead and implement that in the factory. We'll actually call that constructor. All right, so things compile. Let's head over to the factory. And here then in the constructor, what I want to do is set the number of cylinders. So on the Blazer, let's make that 6, and let's make the Forerunner an 8-cylinder. Okay, so just by adding this value in, now the way that the runtime will work is it's going to look for a constructor that takes an int. So the constructor that will run is here. So let's see that in action. There we go. So we've got the cylinder counts now being filled in, and we can see the maintenance costs being calculated, although my formatting, I would get some points off for that because I should have 2 zeros there for currency, right? All right, so here we can see in the car constructor setting the cylinder count. So the overloaded constructor with cylinder count is being called. The no argument constructor is not being called. And so if I wanted to call this constructor for some reason, a lot of times there's code in that no argument constructor that needs to run every time we create a car. And so I can force that to be called by using the keyword this. So this will call the constructor code here. Sometimes I see students do something like this, but that is not going to work. We'll get a compiler error. And in fact, this would create kind of, if it were to work, it would create a second car object, which isn't what we want. We want a single car object. So this keyword is the one that we want here. So let's compile this and then run and see how our output changes. All right, so compile looks good, and then let's go ahead and run. And so our output in terms of the cylinder count and the maintenance, that stuff looks the same. Where we see the difference is in the constructors. And the important thing to note here is that the no argument constructor gets called before the constructor, the rest of the constructor code runs, right? So that's important. And in fact, if I were to move this, and let's say I move that call to the no argument constructor as the third statement in this constructor, in the no argument, or the overloaded constructor. Let's see what happens. So let's recompile. And we get an error message here. It says, a compiler error, call to this, meaning this constructor, must be the first statement in the constructor, and then the caret is pointing to this. So what that means is that we have to call the no argument constructor or any other constructor. We could call a constructor on super, which we'll see in a little bit. We have to do that first. And the reason for that is the compiler is trying to protect us a little bit. If I set the number of cylinders and then I call the no argument constructor, what should happen? And what might happen would be that we'd end up with an empty car object, and that number of cylinders would have been overlaid or set to the default value, which is 0 in this case. So the compiler, again, is protecting us. We have to call any other constructor first before we call the, I guess I would call it a more specific constructor where we're setting values. All right, so that's great. We've got number of cylinders there, but what if I want to do more than that and I want to set things like the make and the model and the color and the year? So it creates a car with, let's create a new constructor here with make, model, year, color, and cylinders. So we've got lots of different information that we were setting here. Let's eliminate the need to have to call these setters and instead kind of do it in one move, in one statement with that constructor. So on the car, I'm going to add a few new parameters here, and I'm going to add them in the order in which they're called to keep things relatively organized. So here we'll have an at param for the make, which is cars make. At param for the model, which is the car's model. Oops. At param for the year, color. And then cylinders. I think that's all of the information that I wanted to pass in. And then let's update our parameter list here. So we have a string for make, a string for model, an int for the year, a string for color, and we'll leave the int for number of cylinders. So now I need to set those values. So we've got number of cylinders. Now I can't use this dot and then color because I don't have getters and setters for that here, correct? That is in the vehicle. And in vehicle, we had getter and setters for that, so we can call set model, for example. So set make, we can set to the make, set model for the model. Oops, that should have been color. All right, so make, model, year, color, and number of cylinders. Let's compile, see where we're at here, see if we've done things correctly so far. Compile's okay. How about a run? And in fact, we're really not ready to run yet because we're not actually calling this. So let's go ahead and update our call to the constructor here and add in our make, our model, our year, our color, and the number of cylinders. And so I can then get rid of these sets. Go ahead and save that. And I'm going to leave the old one just so we've, in the interest of time more than anything else. We'll compile. Compile looks good, and then we'll run. And output also looks good. It looks like I've got in the car constructor setting the cylinder count. That was from a copy and paste, right? So I should have updated my comment here in the car to say in the car constructor setting, we'll change this to setting all values. So hopefully that wasn't confusing as to which constructor was really being called, but just in case it was, let's verify that we were doing things correctly there. All right, so in the create vehicles, in the car constructor, and then the car constructor setting all of the values. Now, thinking about this, really here, I'm calling the no argument constructor. I've got some duplicate code, right? These three lines, or two of those lines anyway, look identical to what I have in number of cylinders. And that's something we want to be careful of as developers, is not to have duplicate lines of code. So really, what I'm going to do instead is call the constructor that does set the number of cylinders. So what I can do here is call this. Again, that refers to the class that I'm in, the constructor passing in the number of cylinders. So this line of code, line 33, will actually call the constructor here, which will then call the no argument constructor. So I've taken care of that. I'm still making that call to the no argument constructor. Then it will set the number of cylinders, and then we'll continue down setting the make, model, year, and color on the vehicle. So let's go ahead and compile, make sure that things are looking good there. Let's see, call to this must be the first statement in the constructor. So the problem is I can't do anything before I make that call to the constructor. So even my system.out.println needs to be after the call to the other constructor. And because again, the compiler doesn't know exactly what I'm doing on line 33, and it wants to make sure that I'm not setting something up that I'm going to end up overlaying by calling that other constructor. So we create that first. So let's compile and verify that that took care of my error. And then let's run. And things here are still looking good. So here we're in the create vehicles, that's in the factory, in the car constructor, right? That's that empty constructor call, which should be here. So that's what's running first. Then in the car constructor, okay, so we create the car object, set the number of cylinders, and then we're setting the rest of the values. So that order is important, even though it's really this code that was called. We're going to go up the chain here, starting with kind of that most basic car constructor and then working our way back down. So this is a mechanism that we can use to ensure that all of our constructors are called. Now you might think, well, I'll just call the no argument constructor here too, just to make sure that it gets done. So let's pop that in there and see if the compiler lets us do that. And it doesn't. So, or it does, but it won't allow us then to call another constructor. So a call to a constructor, another constructor, must be the very first statement in that constructor. So this number of cylinders I'm not allowed to do because now I'm calling one constructor and then a second constructor. So you have to be thoughtful about how you organize that to make sure that everything gets called as needed. Now, we can take this one step further. So we're still having to call these set methods on the vehicle. And that doesn't really sit very well with me. I would rather have a constructor that does that work for me, since this is kind of repetitive. Every single time I call this constructor, I'm just going to call the setters here. Why not just call a vehicle constructor that maybe took each of those values? So that would look something like this. So just like we use this to call the constructor that's in this class, we would call super to set these guys. So we can do super.make, model, year, and color. Now I'm going to run into a situation where I'm again trying to call two constructors. So this may not work in all cases. I may have to actually do the set. So there are some times when we may not be able to do quite what we want to do. Let's leave that way that way for now, and we'll come back and fix that up in a second. And we'll head over to vehicle, and then let's write the constructor to take those 4 parameters. And in fact, I can kind of borrow from the car here a little bit. And we'll add a constructor into vehicle. And you might notice this, remember, this is an abstract class. That's okay. We can still have a constructor here. We won't instantiate an actual vehicle object using that because this is abstract, but we can still provide that constructor to make things a little bit easier for us. So here we're in the vehicle constructor, setting all the values. And so we'll go ahead and this dot make equals make, this dot model equals model, this dot year equals year, and this dot color equals color. And we can get rid of the cylinder business because that doesn't apply to our vehicle. It only applied to the car. So we'll get rid of that. And update our list of parameters here. All right. So our use of the car constructor doesn't change. Here we're still calling 2 constructors, so let's just verify that the compiler is going to prevent me from doing that, and it does. And I'm not invalid method declaration, return type required. Let's see what I've got going on there. Oh, I know. I've copy and paste gets me into trouble more often than not, I think, sometimes. So here, rather than car, this should be vehicle, right? For this to be a constructor, it has to match. All right, so we've got more error messages now. So constructor vehicle and class vehicle cannot be applied to class airplane extends vehicle. And that might seem like a big mouthful, and it really is. The more specific information about required and found is what's going to indicate to us what's really going on here. So required, string, string, int, string. That's the constructor that I just built, right? Found, no arguments. Actual and formal argument lists differ in length. So what's going on here? Well, what's happening is that I don't have a no argument constructor here in vehicle anymore, right? Because as soon as I overloaded the vehicle constructor, the compiler is not creating a no argument constructor for me. And behind the scenes, that's being used, right? Whenever I create an airplane, this vehicle constructor would get called just like with the car. And so I no longer have that no argument constructor. So that's exactly a demonstration of the reason why you have to make sure that you always create those no argument constructors if you start writing any of your own constructors. So let's add that in and see how things change here. We're still gonna have a problem with the order of our constructors that we're calling in the car, but that's a separate issue, so let's tackle this one first. So here we've got public vehicle, we just want a simple no argument constructor, and I'm going to add my system.out.println here so that we can see when this gets called. And so this will be the vehicle, oops, no arg, and sometimes we call that the default constructor. And then we need our comments here. All right, and then remember that it's a best practice to call that no argument constructor from any of your other constructors, just in case we're doing something important here. We don't want to duplicate that code, and we also don't want to miss out on running that. So call the no argument constructor for the class that we're in. All right, so we should see now that the airplane compile message goes away. So let's clear this up and recompile. And the one problem we have now is that call to two constructors back in car on line 33, which we had kind of started off looking at here. So in this case, I'm going to set the number of cylinders here as well. And there may be a better way to handle that. And off the top of my head, it's not coming to me what might be a better solution, but I have a feeling as soon as I'm not recording, the light will come on. So I'll update you guys on a better way to handle this if it comes to mind. So, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I did not want to cut that out of there. I just wanted to copy. All right, so a little bit of a duplicate here, so and that's still not quite what I want. We want to do the set, which is just this line. And then we'll call to the super, make, model year, and color. All right, so we have a single call to the super constructor, and then number of cylinders we're going to set separately, and then we've got our system.out.println just indicating which constructor we're in. So let's run this again and take a look at kind of the chain of events that happen when we run and which constructors are getting called. All right, so here we are in the vehicle no argument constructor, then the vehicle constructor that sets all the values, then in the car constructor that sets all the values, and then repeating that again with the second vehicle. So that is the process. And incidentally, I should have mentioned here that on that first vehicle, or the second vehicle no argument default constructor is being called. There's no call to the vehicle constructor setting all the values, right? And there's no call to the car constructor setting all the values. So the only thing we're doing in the car constructor is setting that cylinder count, but you'll notice that that vehicle no arg constructor still gets called by default. So that order is important. All right, so I think that demonstrates pretty much everything that I wanted to cover here. So we've got our default no argument constructor. We've talked about the importance of making sure that we add that even if we aren't necessarily going to explicitly call it. It does get called by our concrete subclasses, as we saw. With vehicle, we needed to have that no argument constructor. And then we talked about calling the no argument constructor within the same class using the this keyword. We also took a look at calling up to the superclass constructor here, passing along make, model, year, and color. All right, that was a lot of information and a lot of constructor business for you to take in. Time to practice with the labs. And so we've got here Lab 2 is going to have you practice with constructors, as well as Lab 3, where we're overloading constructors. So you've got examples of both of those. And then I'll be back to talk about math and static classes coming up, and that will put you into Lab 4. We'll see you in the next video.